Welcome to Dr. Lottie Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. I'm a physician, medical intuitive, evidential psychic medium, international keynote speaker, and author of Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, an inspirational story about transformation, healing, and spirituality, which won first place in the category of spiritual leadership in August 2021 from Living Now Book Awards. This award recognizes truly world-changing books that contribute to positive global change. The inspiration for this podcast came from my own life experiences. As I have journeyed through life, it has taught me that we're part of a greater divine web of interconnectedness. I have walked the path of illness, healing, and transformation. After 2 near-death experiences, I became clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, and was guided to attend medical school at the age of 54. We will be meeting with many different types of doctors, healers, as well as spiritual leaders, educators, and other inspiring souls in this podcast. It is my hope that you will gain information and create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and bridge the gap between science and soul. If you are a person who understands the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and would like to take one of my courses or work with me to create a path of healing your own life, please visit divinespiritualessence.com or drlottie.com. To stay up to date on future episodes and to help us reach a larger audience, remember to subscribe, review, and share this podcast, as well as subscribing to my newsletter at divinespiritualessence.com. Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, my guest is Justin Wilkinson. Justin Wilkinson is a lifetime student of the Ageless Wisdom and has been working professionally in the world of video production for over a decade in Los Angeles. In that time, he has also created a YouTube channel, Monadic Media, which has over 100 videos and accumulated over 10 million views since its launch in 2009. The purpose of the channel is to present the Ageless Wisdom through the new medium of multimedia, while utilizing the methods of color and sound to help awaken to intuition. His latest work includes the new series, The Electric Bridge and The Gateway of Liberation. So welcome, Justin. It's an honor to have you as a guest today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I can't wait to have you share your knowledge about the Ageless Wisdom with all the listeners today. I have watched probably 30 of your videos on your YouTube channel, Monadic Media. And I love how some of the videos are short. They may be 10 or 15 minutes long, and other ones are 30 minutes or an hour. Mm-hmm. And you can always find something that fits your timetable to get some knowledge of the Ageless Wisdom. So everybody out there, go check out his YouTube channel, Monadic Media. So today, I would like to start by asking you, how were you introduced to the study of Ageless Wisdom? And what is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I definitely have to reflect on because it's something that has been sequential, definitely. I was born in Laguna Beach and moved at a very young age to Sedona, Arizona. And so I lived the first 5 years of my life there. And many people consider Sedona a very spiritual place. And my parents naturally resonated with the energy there. And they were a part of a Waldorf school there. So there was already at the very beginning that intention and that energy and that focus. But I was, of course, just a kid. I was 3, 4, 5 years old. But right after that, we moved to Ojai, California, which, as we know, the Crotona Institute is there, and Happy Valley and Meditation Mount having its roots back with the well, with Theosophy, the Lucis Trust, and many Krishnamurti lived in Ojai. So there's a long history of esotericists and spiritual occultists who have spent time and lived in Ojai. So that's where I grew up. And so I've always been around it in that regard, but also with my family on my mother's side, her parents were Rosicrucians and were Theosophists, and her grandmother was also a Rosicrucian and Theosophist. So it's something that's always kind of been there. And I have a memory of being about 9 or 10 years old, and my grandmother was reading a book. Oh gosh, I wish I could tell you which one it was. It was probably a theosophical book. Anyways, it had a picture of one of the Mahatmas, and I remember asking, who's that? And my grandmother said, well, that's one of the masters. And I thought, and I was thinking to myself, okay, right, they're like what comes next. That's what understand. And then just dealing with that and thinking and just pondering on that at 9 or 10 years old to the capacities that I could, of course, at that age. So then you go through your teenage years and all that sort of stuff happens. And then at 19, I moved to Los Angeles, and that's when I started to I had gone to India several times in my life as well. So I'd been exposed to meditation and spirituality and yoga, and went alone at 19 also. So that was kind of a big time when I was really starting to kind of come into my sense of self and becoming a young adult, and a lot of these things opening up. And then I came to LA and started my career. And that's also when I started to read the Alice Bailey books, or what are sort of known as the Blue Books. And then also looking into various other traditions, of course. I've always been someone that's been fascinated with many approaches to understanding what you could call the ageless wisdom, or the perennial philosophy, or just the deeper spiritual truths, of life. So yes, so it's been very sequential, and it's been something that has accumulated year after year. So that just gives context to sort of how it started. And then, of course, from reading the Blue Books and getting started in my career, that then has essentially led me to where I am now, to just simply put.
So then you created this Monadic Media, and there is all these videos on there, and in one of those videos, one of the videos that are called Wisdom Bites, you talk about the 7 planes: logoic, monadic, spiritual, intuition, mental, emotional, physical. What is the meaning of these 7 planes, and where do we fit in as humans? On which plane do we exist as humans of all those planes?
Yes, that's a great question. And that will, of course, tie into the question of what is the 7 rays, because the 7 rays and the 7 planes can't really ever be separated. I think of an aspect of the planes as being sort of vertically aligned, and the rays being horizontally aligned. And so they're always meeting each other at every point in space. But perhaps more importantly, at every level of density of space. So, as we are in these physical bodies, operating in this physical world, and it has, science has come to understand the different states of matter, of the solid, liquid, gaseous states of matter, and plasma being understood to be the 4th state of matter. And that is essentially about where our current threshold is in observation and in data measurement of what we perceive of as real, as reality, of existence, however we want to define it. But of course, for those who are on the path and are seeking a spiritual life and have had an awakening to an extent, have come to realize that that is not the full scope of the universe and of existence that we live in. So there are many traditions of ancient origins that we can look at that have all, in their own cultural, metaphorical, and mythological ways, tried to convey the idea of what this universe and this world is. You know, in like Norse mythology, there's the world tree, and in Kabbalah, or the tree of life, I should. And then in Hinduism, they talk about the lokas and all these different ideas of, you know, in the Judeo-Christian terms, you know, there's sort of heaven and hell and purgatory and different layers of understanding. So, but as we've come more into the age of science and reason, we can speak of it perhaps a little closer to its more truth, in the sense that, you know, we understand all existence as being energy and matter, and that energy and matter can never be separated. They're always independently, co-mutually existing. And so that's sort of the starting point of where we can get into understanding the seven planes, because the seven planes are an expression of the divine septonate of existence, of our planet, of our solar system, of our own nature. And the sevenness of all of this comes from the divine trinity, or the threefold architect that we can find at all scales of existence. So from the tiny atoms of particles to the solar system to our own nature, there's the subject, and then there's object, and then there's the relation between. There's positive and there's negative, and then there's the relationship between. So, and then of course the divine trinity arises from the duality of the initial emergence of the singular unity of all life. So ultimately, it all goes back to the deep, profound unity of all oneness. That in the deepest, ultimate sense, everything is the same thing. There is only one thing, and that oneness, through a process of self-mutation, becomes the appearance of many. And as that happens, we have this reflection of as above, so below, this microcosmic, macrocosmic existence, and kind of everything in between. And at those different scales of life, consciousness or sentience is perceiving itself at all these different levels. So there's a minuscule, infinitesimally small amount of consciousness inside of an atom, as there is a cosmic consciousness inside galaxies. So the divine septonate arises from that. And there's obviously, of course, I'm speaking very generally here, of course, to that process. But the seven planes are these seven vibrational spectrums or bands that interpenetrate one another. So the seventh, of course, being the densest of those planes, which we would call physical. That's the normal world that we know. And as you move inwardly, more subjectively, each plane becomes a higher frequency. So that the matter of that plane is just literally vibrating faster than the plane that it substands. And each plane has seven subplanes, just like each ray has seven subrays. So there's, various arrangements of how these energies all interpenetrate and resonate with one another. So that's essentially the most broad perspective of looking at the seven planes, and how there are states of consciousness that associate with each plane, and there are qualities of energy that are associated with each plane. And the journey of self-realization and this journey of life is essentially, when we look at ourselves from a personality and a soul and a spirit, is that journey of how our consciousness really has this sort of ebb and flow process through these planes of an involution coming into matter, and an evolution of ascending back into the higher planes. And so that is another perspective of how it is personally related to us as well. And that also extends to cosmic levels, which is just, beyond our normal experience. But by virtue of the principle of it, we can understand how it's reflected, when we understand an aspect of ourself, that truth is also at a cosmic level as well.
So if you talk about ascended masters, for example, would they exist then at a certain frequency or a certain plane?
Definitely. Yeah. So your earlier question was, where do we as humans exist on these planes? And so there's different ways to answer that question, because we exist on all planes, yet as a human being, our consciousness is only aware of a certain level on those planes. So normally we would say that the realm of the reincarnating human soul is limited to what could be called the three lower worlds, which are the mental, emotional, and physical planes. Those are the planes of objectivity and are the planes where you have more of the existence of becoming more than being. So the higher planes, the spiritual planes, is more associated with the awareness, the consciousness of just pure being, where down in the lower planes, it's more of the process of becoming. So that's one way to understand it. Of course, there are many ways to understand all this. So as a human being, as our personality operates in the mental, emotional, and physical. That's where the soul reincarnates. That's the realm of which this life as a human being is experienced in. But we are already, we don't have a soul, we are a soul. And so our soul is already on those higher planes, as is our spirit, but our physical brain capacity and awareness, we have not learned how to penetrate deeper into what we really are. So we are just unaware of it, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the ascended masters. So people talk about ascended masters. Do you know what plane they would exist at if we talk about the different planes?
So the soul, the human soul, which is said to be the principle of relationship between our lowest point and our highest point. So if we're looking at the seven planes, what we are is a divine spark, a divine emanation, or what's sometimes called the monad, the highest point of what we are in our constitution, and our lowest point, the physical body. And in terms of the energy centers, at the very base of the spine, the lowest point in which that spark descends to contact matter. Our soul is sort of that harmonizing, equilibrizing field that holds those two opposites of subject and object in relationship to another. And as consciousness evolves through all the kingdoms of nature, the mineral, the plant, the animal, the human, when we reach the human, consciousness creates what's called the causal body, which is on the higher mental plane. And that is the container of our own individualized consciousness that we acquire through the process of reincarnation. And so the ascended masters have gone through that whole process of being a human being and you could literally say, broken free of that causal body and can now exist in a far more free, to use a relative term, free state of existence upon the higher planes, upon the Buddhic plane or the intuitional plane and the spiritual or atmic plane. So just as we as human beings are very associated in our emotional life, and our mental life, and are physically existing, the masters are. But as a human being, we are trying to reach the higher mental plane. We're trying to reach into the soul and become soul conscious, where the masters have graduated from that process and are now trying to get monadic consciousness. So their physical existence is more in the realm of mental thought forms, and their emotional feelings that they have is more of a Buddhic or intuitional energy, and their mind is more in the higher reflection of the atmic or spiritual plane. So everything reflects everything else. And everything that we see and what we are as a human being and our apparatus is just a lower reflection of what we are on this higher level. So it's kind of like a mirror, essentially. So the masters are in these higher planes. And to use the term master is also a relative term because there are different initiations or steps that could be the hallmark of how our consciousness expands. And so as we evolve further, we're able to go deeper into ourselves. And so as we go deeper into ourselves, we go higher up the planes. But it's not really that kind of, it's not really higher. It's really more penetrating deeper into reality.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's not like it's a cake layer.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But when we're dealing with a book or a chart, we have to kind of, in this world of limitations, use these things to depict it.
Right. It's how else are we going to try and make sense out of it in
exactly. Right.
living in our bodies with the consciousness that we have? So you mentioned the causal body, and can you explain a little bit what the causal body is and how we take information about our life with us to the next incarnation?
Yes, that's definitely a fascinating question. I think a lot of people are interested in the idea of reincarnation and are open to it. And a lot of people just have that intuition that, yeah, this isn't my first life. And I'm sure that I've had many lives. And some people, they leave it at that. And they don't necessarily go further into pursuing an understanding of what that means or what that entails. And so the idea of the causal body, and it's been reflected and has different metaphorical understandings, of course, in different traditions. But the causal body in the Ageless Wisdom is understood to exist on the higher mental plane. So what this means is we have a physical body and of the lower solids, liquid, gases, and then the etheric component of our physical body is the 4 higher subplanes of the physical, meaning each plane has 7 subplanes. And so the etheric aspect is this more subtle electrical quality of the physical body that people can define as the health aura, or just the aura in general, the 7 energy centers up from the base of the spine to the crown. But we also have the emotional nature, an emotional body of where we feel these attractions and repulsions, these likes and dislikes. And then we have our concrete mind on the 4 lower subplanes of the mental plane. And this is what is composed of our personality. But just interior to the personality is the causal body, existing on these 3 higher subplanes of the mental plane, or what's called the higher mind or the abstract mind. So where the concrete mind is always trying to create that image of the thought it's conceiving, the abstract mind is not necessarily limited to that process of experience. And so the causal body begins as the soul individualizes. And so this is an interesting conversation, because what this means is that the difference between what is a human being and what is an animal, in the similar ways, what is the difference between an animal and a plant? What is the difference between a plant and a mineral? Each kingdom of nature builds upon itself faculties, and it starts with just geometry, and then sentiency, and then mobility, metabolism, and then into a human being. We are everything from the lower kingdoms that has reached this point. And so animals are, based upon their species, are associated with a kind of group soul, a collective soul that is associated with that particular species, whether it's an elephant, whether it's a giraffe, whether it's a lizard. And there's an evolution between fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. And the point I'm getting at is that the differences between what we are as a human being is that the soul becomes individualized. And so, for example, what that means is animals live lives like we do. They experience things like we do, but that experience is contributing more to the group soul of that particular species, not so much to the individual animal on a general basis. So, but with the human kingdom, the soul is individualized, and the causal body starts as this tiny little nucleus. It's like a little spark on the higher mental plane. And as we quite literally go through hundreds, if not thousands of incarnations, that causal body slowly develops and is formed on the higher mental plane. And there are different parts of the causal body. So we have what is called the jewel in the lotus, which is at the center of the causal body. And that's like it's like a flower that is like hasn't yet opened, essentially. It's an energy center, just like all of our energy centers are. So it's the energy center that is essentially what our soul really is. And as that flower opens, those petals represent different qualities of consciousness that we experience as humans, like knowledge, love, sacrifice, will. And these are experiences or departments of life that are interconnected with the laws that govern the human soul. And so another aspect of the causal body, though, is what are called the permanent atoms. And the permanent atoms are like little storage devices that are associated with our physical body, our emotional body, and our mental body. And what they are is it's how each life, if the soul is kind of descending an aspect of itself into the lower worlds, and then drawing upon the substance of that plane to build a body. The permanent atoms are the atoms of the first subplane of each of those lower planes. So the first of the physical, the first of the emotional, and the first of the mental. And so, for example, after death of the physical body, we decay, cohesion is lost, and the body either is cremated or we bury ourselves in the ground, and the matter of that body disintegrates and returns to just the substance of the earth and to the ground. But the permanent atoms retain aspects of the experiences that we undergo each life. And at the process of death, the soul is gathering those back into itself. And then there's what's called the second death, which is the decay or disintegration of the emotional or astral body. And then we move into the mental plane. And then those permanent atoms come into the causal body. And the texture and their quality and the vibratory nature that they are essentially existing as, which is a reflection of what our experiences have been, is what is a part of the process of building that causal body. But the permanent atoms are also associated with, there's also dissonance in the permanent atoms, which is the karma that we accumulate in our lives. And so in the next life, as the soul is beginning that process again of descending back into the lower worlds, it has to work with that dissonance. And that is essentially what our karma is. So the soul is always in a state of, in each life, of what is the dharma and what is the karma. What's the direction that's going to lead towards more evolution, but then what is the karma that needs to be reconciled as well. And so the soul is the higher intelligence that governs that process, because we've all accrued so much karma over our lives that one life would just not be enough to reconcile all of that, but this also gives us an understanding to why some people seem to just have so much hardship in their life and why other people seem to just have everything be so easy for them. And then there's everything in between. So it just gives us the understanding that we may be at a point in our life where certain things are happening that feel very challenging for us. And we may look at someone else's life and think, well, that is or isn't happening to me, or that seems fair, or that doesn't seem fair, or that person seems so nice, but why are all these bad things happening to them? Or how come this really bad person in the world is doing all these things and nothing bad's happening to them? It's because the soul of each person has the intelligence to essentially know how to guide that process as to how the karma that is aggregated in our lives and how we fulfill and unfulfill that process. So that is an aspect of understanding the causal body. And the causal body, though, is also where within that is how we develop our I consciousness, the sense of who we are as an individual. It's the container of our individuality and is essentially what we're all reaching toward eventually as human beings. And then we get there, but that then becomes a limitation. And so it doesn't end at the causal body. That's not the end all be all. Eventually we have to break free of that. And then we go even further beyond into what is beyond the causal body and at a deeper level.
So how does the soul enter into the body when we get incarnated? What are there steps that the soul goes through to sort of count down?
So that comes into what is known in the East as the Antakarana, or what's called also in some of the Vedic scriptures and Hindu traditions as the Sutratma. In the Bible, it's referred to as the silver cord. It's kind of like our spiritual umbilical cord. And basically what it is it's really like an electrical tendril. It's an electrical and a magnetic force that is extended from an inner state outwardly. And it quite literally ties itself in knots. And this physical body is just the lowest knot on that rope. And so the soul is essentially using sound, vibration, and frequency to hold the matter and atoms of our body in coherence. When we look at the body, we study the human body, it's this amazing tapestry of biology and psychology and muscles and bodily processes and molecules and so many things. It's a whole universe unto itself. But there is a organizing, animating principle that's orchestrating and holding all of that in relationship to itself. And that is essentially what soul is, or that is an aspect of the soul in the human body. And so similar thing in the emotional body, similar thing in the mental body. So there's different aspects of the Antakarana. There is the aspect of what's called the life thread and what's called the consciousness thread. So an interesting thing to ponder on is what is the difference between death and the difference between falling asleep? Because both death and sleep are the consciousness thread abstracting itself out of the physical body. Yet in death, the life thread is also abstracted, unlike falling asleep. So there's an aspect of the life thread that extends not really from the soul, but from the monad, which is really the essence of life itself. And that is like an electrical energy that comes straight down into the heart. As the heart beats and the cells are kept alive and coherent, we do not die in our sleep. But at death, both the life thread and the consciousness thread are abstracted and pulled out of the physical body. And that's quite literally what death is. So when someone drowns and is dead for 45 minutes or something happens, but they don't actually die, it's because the life thread wasn't severed. But the consciousness thread went inward and they may have had some kind of experience, whether they call it a near-death experience or whatever that experience is, however they define it. Sometimes it's a very concrete, tangible thing. Sometimes it's just, I felt love, light, and all this presence, and I don't even know how to explain it. So, but there's another part of the Antakarana, So those are the two descending parts. There's also an ascending part, meaning the life thread and the consciousness thread come from the soul down into the personality. But there's also a part called the creative thread that has to start from the personality and make its way up. And that's something that we have to essentially build ourselves. And what that does is it allows us to bridge the gulf between the lower mind and the higher mind, or the lower and the higher mental plane. And it's what allows us to eventually come to the point where, with our own consciousness and awareness, return back up into the causal body. Because our spiritual nature can only come so low. It can only descend so much. And that is, that's a interestingly vast science that, we just don't understand it, but it only comes down so much. But once that light, that creative thread can reach a certain point, then they meet. And then object and subject come into a more unified state. That is the sense of what spiritual marriage is, of the divine masculine, the divine feminine coming together, and the reconciliation of opposites coming together.
So is that building that you're extending up, that creative thread, is that what then builds the bridge, the Antakarana?
Yes.
When people refer to that.
Yeah, that's part of the rainbow. The rainbow bridge can be, you can look at the rainbow bridge as being all of this process, but also that unique specific process of building the bridge between those subplanes.
So when you talk about the soul versus the spirit, what's the difference between soul and spirit?
That is a good question. That's a question a lot of people ask. And a lot of people will say, well, they just seem like synonymous terms. And they don't seem to think there is a difference. And so that difference is, you could say, relevant for some people and not as relevant for others. But I would say the best way, I don't want to say the best way, because there probably is no best way, an effective way of stating the difference is that we can talk about, I have my body here in this room, and you have your body there in that room, and that person there has their body. Just like we can say, I have my soul, you have your soul, and he or she have their soul. But we can't really say my spirit and your spirit, because there's only spirit. So spirit, and this comes back to what I said earlier about the idea of the Trinity, that there is this all-pervasive unity of life that is the true, deepest truth of the universe. That's all ultimately one. We always have to keep that in the back of our minds. It is ultimately all one thing. So in that deepest sense, there is no differentiation. There are no differences at all. But in the world of the universe and of human beings and of atoms, there's the appearance of multiplicity, and there's a spectrum of energy. And so matter is spirit in its lowest form, and spirit is matter in its highest form. And there's the relation between those two. And so the spirit is synonymous with what we could call the essence of life itself, the idea of just things being living and alive, where the soul is more, what is the quality that exists in that form? So there's the matter aspect, the form or the personality, which is the form itself. It's the apparatus, it's the instrument. Then what is the quality of the form? A rose has a different quality than a redwood tree. An elephant has a different quality than a bird. Human beings have slightly different qualities. But at a deeper spiritual level, where everything is alive and is living. Your livingness isn't different than my livingness. I'm not more alive than you are alive. And that's true also, I'm not more alive than an animal. And really, is an animal more alive than a plant? There's a difference in quality and consciousness and what that form can do. But the aspect of livingness, of this spiritual aspect of livingness, is a much more impersonal, universal kind of homogeneous force, where soul is more of the quality that is imbued in that form. So that is essentially a way of understanding the difference between what is our soul and what is our spirit.
And can you touch again upon the spiritual triad?
Yes. So the spiritual triad is where we go as a person, as a being, however we want to describe it, once we've reached a point in our evolution and we are going beyond the causal body. So this is where the masters of the wisdom, all these souls who have gone through that experience and have graduated from the human kingdom, that is the next domain of experience that they are moving into. And that is, so just like we have the personality and we have the physical, emotional, mental aspects of that personality, and then just like we have the soul, which has its causal body, its permanent atoms, and then the jewel in the lotus, which is at the center. And so once that lotus or that energy center opens up, the consciousness is able to go into the monadic sphere or the spiritual triad. So the spiritual triad, so just like the personality is the center of those three, and the soul is the center of three types of energy, thus the monad or the divine spark that we truly are in the highest sense has the spiritual triad of Atma, Buddhi, Manas, or spiritual love, spiritual will, and spiritual mind, of which our mind and emotions and physical are a lower reflection of. And so that is, now what really is that though? Those higher subplanes that we then move into are really just the mind of the planetary logos that we are a part of, because we are really just cells in a larger organism. And we eventually wake up to that realization, that truth, that the earth is not a dead rock floating in space, but it's an energy center inside of a larger energy center. And it is evolving like we're evolving. It has a spirit, soul, and body like we do. And there's quite literally a cosmic bloodstream that is pulsating, and there's a heartbeat that is animating everything together. And each spirit, each monad has a different causal destiny that it travels on. And there is a whole realm of experience that we will eventually come to be a part of consciously. And we will awaken to the higher evolution and the higher purpose of the universe. And so moving into the spiritual triad is really a process of moving into the feelings and thoughts of the larger intelligence and consciousness that is the planet.
Makes perfect sense. And how all the people on Earth is part of the Earth, and the Earth is alive, and the universe is alive. And
right.
I know you talk about this in your electric bridge and the plasma of the universe. So can you just tell us a little bit what those two new series are about, the electric bridge?
Yeah, so the electric bridge is a series I've been developing that's being adapted from the articles written by Lawrence Newey, who's the co-president of Lucis Trust. And the objective of the electric bridge, whether you're reading the article or watching the video, is to bridge the deeper spiritual occult truths with our modern science and modern understanding of science, specifically in the realm and territory of electrical phenomena. Because everything I've been talking about in terms of the science of all of this will be revealed through the understanding of electricity. And the electricity that flows through our power lines and powers our computers is just the faintest emanation of cosmic electricity, and electricity of our soul, and the electricity of our spirit, and really just the electricity of life itself. And so a lot of the work that we correlate with is by an international organization called the Thunderbolts Project. And the Thunderbolts Project is a large group of hundreds, maybe if not 1,000 or more, astronomers and physicists and electrical engineers and biologists and psychologists. It's really people in every department of science that are, I would say, on the most cutting edge of scientific work and research, because they're really beginning to understand how fascinating and how interesting electricity is, and how just little we really know about what electricity actually is. And they're challenging the very deep-seated, I would say, assumptions in cosmology and in terms of astrophysics, of the narrative that's been established since the time of Isaac Newton into the turn of the century, once we started really observing galaxies and stars and understanding the universe to a certain extent, and all the ideas of black holes and how stars are powered and what the universe is. The point being is that we've attributed the force of gravity to everything. You know, if you go to any school, go to any university, ask any astronomer what's going on in the universe, the answer is always, well, gravity's doing that, and gravity's doing that, and that's happening because of gravity, and that's happening because of gravity, and that weird thing over there, somehow gravity is doing that. And as our observational technology has gotten more advanced, and we've seen like pulsars and magnetars and all these more strange kinds of phenomena in the cosmos, it's becoming more difficult to explain those things with the assumption that gravity is what's essentially doing everything. So they're saying, well, first of all, we know that the electromagnetic force is billions of times stronger than gravity. And so what if we've given gravity a little too much credit here? And anyways, that's a whole other realm of study to focus on for the people who want to ask the questions of, this is all interesting, but what's the science behind all of this? And is there any evidence? And the Thunderbolts scientists are not spiritual cultists. They're not, reading theosophy. They're not trying to prove spiritual axioms. They're still just working in the purely physical space. But a lot of them are also recognizing the electrical quality of space and what they're kind of coming full circle to with the idea of the ether, or the luminous ether, of being the state of matter just beyond plasma. And that is really the next threshold of where science is going and is heading. Because once we can really discover that the actual fabric of what space is and its electrical quality, that's going to open up the door to so many things that will completely transform science, because it'll explain so much about how the environment works, how ecology works, how our psyche works, what does it mean to have good vibes and bad vibes, and what lightning actually is, and just it'll totally transform our paradigm of understanding the world that we live in.
It makes sense when you watch it. So for those of you who haven't seen it, go to Monadic Media on YouTube and look up the electric bridge. It's absolutely fascinating. And the last question I have for you today is, what do you think the meaning of life is?
That's a good question. What do I think the meaning of life is? Well, we've talked about so much of how consciousness is existing on so many levels. And, for a tiny little atom that's just a little infinitesimally small particle, what is the meaning of life of that atom? What is the meaning of the galaxy at the cosmic scale? And what is the meaning of life for us as a human being in this world? And so there's a degree of that question and how it's related to all of that. Meaning but there's also the unique aspect of like, there's this, it's special to be a human being, and it's special to be an animal, and it's special to be a planet. So for us, the meaning of life is the experience of life, really. It's the experience of life and what that means as a journey and an evolution of consciousness. And, all this can be conveyed in so many ways. And so, I always kind of make the joke that like life is kind of like a great cosmic game of hide and go seek. It's like God is kind of playing hide and go seek with itself. And so in that regard, the meaning of life is just the process of remembering who we are. It's a journey of identification, and it's a journey of realization and experience. It's like it's like we're all colorblind and don't even know it. And then all of a sudden we realize it's a world of color. And then all of a sudden everything's different, yet nothing's changed. So that's a very relative word. And so in the human kingdom, I would say the meaning of life is very associated with why does the human soul incarnate to begin with? Because the larger life that the human soul is like a nucleus or cell within is also evolving. Just like all the cells in my body have to sort of follow certain principles and laws to do what they do. So me as an organism, I can exist and have homeostasis and have my body work properly. So I can touch things, smell things, hear things, and do all that. So for the personality, the meaning of life is to become intelligent. For the soul, it's to become loving. And for the spirit, it is to step into the larger will and the animating force of the universe itself. And so all of that's interconnected. And so we could possibly say there's a way to give one answer to it all. So I would say the meaning of life is to enjoy life, to have fun, because it's all a game. That's all it is. It's all just a big game, really. And we just are just kind of like actors on a stage, and we are just putting on different masks and playing these different roles, and then we realize why all that's even happening to begin with. And so it's a journey, and it's an experience that ultimately we should orient ourselves to learn how to find joy in that, in the mundane. To learn how to find joy in the most mundane aspects of life.
I love it. That's a great message too, to everybody out there. And how can people learn more about you or work with you, or do you have a website that they can go to?
I don't have a personal website. You can message on the Monadic Media Facebook page, which I don't unfortunately go on all that much, but if you message me, I will respond. We have our email address and contact info on the YouTube page, on the About page on YouTube. So you can just reach out to me directly if you have questions or just want to make a comment or statement or whatever.
And there is also another website, 7ray.org.
Yes, 7rays.org is associated with the Institute of the 7 Rays. And that is a conference that occurs in Arizona each year and is associated with the Maury Federation, which is an online school run by Michael Robbins, who is also a student of the Ageless Wisdom as well.
All right. So I will put the links to the Monadic Media YouTube channel in the podcast notes as well. So people can just go there and click on it, as well as the 7ray.org, and link to the Facebook Monadic Media, so people know how to find you or contact you if they wish to do so. So I want to thank you so much, Justin, for taking the time and being a guest on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. Always glad to share.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Dr. Lottie Science with Soul. To stay up to date on future episodes and to help us reach a larger audience, remember to subscribe, review, and share this podcast, as well as subscribing to my newsletter at divinespiritualessence.com. If you are a person who understands the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and would like to take one of my courses or work with me to create a path of healing your own life, please visit divinespiritualessence.com or drlottie.com. My book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, an inspirational story about transformation, healing, and spirituality, which won first place in the category of spiritual leadership in August 2021 from Living Now Book Awards, is available online at Amazon as well as other online platforms worldwide. If you are a person who understands the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and would like to take one of my courses or work with me to create a path of healing your own life, please visit divinespiritualessence.com or drlottie.com.